Greetings, traveler. Have you ever wanted to use a campaign setting for D&D or any other tabletop game based primarily on a post-apocalyptic world? So a world that very few humans survived after an extremely harmful apocalyptic destructive event that took place and wiped out most humans. A place that's in the future, a place that has technology, a place that's very hard to survive on, and it makes the prime ground for a grand adventure like the ones we have in D&D. If you are like that, then today I'd like to introduce my version of this campaign setting called the Blue Wasteland, and it's in fact the campaign setting I use to flesh out the world and get to discover more locations, more characters, and more items for the game that we currently have in development. If you'd like to know more about the game, do go ahead and click the link down below to talk with me about it. Otherwise, let's jump right in. So, what is the Blue Wasteland setting? It's basically a way to use all of the rules in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, although it can be applied to most editions since it's pretty high level, and it focuses primarily on surviving on a world where there is very large areas that are basically uninhabitable. So most of the planet is covered in this type of toxic water. Human culture survives, but it has regressed quite a bit. There is technology, although many people don't know how to use it or have forgotten all the advanced techniques around it. Several items sometimes get washed up by the sea, and people don't know how to use them. They don't know what they do, what the purpose is. But if they do manage to figure them out, then they have magical looking abilities. And another big part of the world is definitely transportation. So because everything is so hostile in this world, the most reliable way of getting from one place to the other over long distances is airships. And these airships are in a true dieselpunk function. They're machines that are, I don't know, 60, 70, 100 or more meters long, and they're banked together from different pieces of machinery that were found here and there. So if you're wondering how they fly, in this world there is this new type of material called the levystone, and basically it acts as a superconductor. It uses the Earth's magnetic field to stay stationary in space. So it can move laterally pretty easily. It takes very little energy to move it like so, but moving it up and down is much harder. And because it's very fuel efficient, if you're just traveling in a straight line, then that is a good way for people to do this type of traveling, build a machine around it, and use it to travel big distances. So this is basically the world that we're going to jump in. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the differences of this world and the mechanics of this world versus a typical fantasy campaign setting as you commonly have in D&D, and talk a little bit about how each of these mechanics is different from what you may be familiar with from a typical D&D campaign setting. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 14 years now. I've been playing D&D for about twice as long, and creating all these worlds, creating absolutely new ideas or customizing rules to make something that I think doesn't exist is something I've been doing for a long time. I really enjoy it, and if it's useful to you, I want to share it here as well. So let's jump in. So the Blue Wasteland. One of the things that I mentioned is that it's supposed to be this post-apocalyptic setting, right? So magic, first of all, doesn't exist in the same way it exists in many D&D campaigns. So the image we have of magic is that a wizard will say a few special words and something happens, like a fireball happens or a magical unicorn springs out of nowhere. That doesn't really happen in this world. In this world, well, it's probably better if we start from the items, since magic touches the items as well. So items in this world are replaced by tech. What does that mean? So in a traditional D&D setting, you have a sword. In this world, you also have a sword, but it's manufactured with much better techniques than swords back in the day. More durable materials, more lightweight materials, and so on. So even though technology has regressed, still the techniques and materials available in the Blue Wasteland world are much better than the typical medieval D&D setting. Now, here you might be thinking, okay, since weapons are basically so strong, everything probably does a lot of damage, right? That's not necessarily the case, because armor has evolved in the same way as well. So when we're talking about advancement in technology, it's always a literal arms race for creating weapons that do more damage, and also armor that can defend against more damage. So a very convenient thing here is that we don't have to scale the basic weapon damage and the basic armor functionality. We can use it as it is from a typical D&D setting. When it comes to magic, though, and magic items, the special effects that magic items do in D&D are replaced by what's possible with technology. And here I don't want to go into too many details about this, because we would have to talk about every item and every effect individually. The general guideline here is that if an effect can be replicated by technology easily enough, then it can stay in the appropriate level. Otherwise, level of power. Otherwise, if it's something very easily replicated by technology, then perhaps it can be of lower level, or something is very hard to do with technology, but it's very easy to do with magic, then that effect would be much more rare in this world than it would be in a typical fantasy setting. So let me give you an example for this, right? So one of the items the players found in this campaign was something like the gauntlets of Ogre Strength, for example. Now, these gauntlets just boost your strength score, but of course there's nothing like that in the real world, or at least in this campaign setting. So in this campaign setting, what works is having an exoskeleton that basically gets charged up over time, like a dynamo or like a battery, and when it detects a certain type of motion, like a swing or a hit, then it knows to release that energy to apply this additional effect of force. So the idea is that the character always wears this exoskeleton, and the exoskeleton gets charged up over time. So when the time comes to do a strong hit, then it knows to switch from charging up the battery to using the battery to do a stronger hit. So this is just as an example. Illusion and similar effects can work with chemicals or strange powders and so on. So I think any DM who wants to use this is probably has a strong enough imagination to see how technology would work in place of magic in this case. So magical swords, magical armor work in a similar way. So perhaps you would like to have a flaming sword, then the flaming sword would work with applying some sort of gasoline or some other material available chemically rather than magically. So we touched upon the items. Let's talk about the magic in more detail now. So right off the bat, we mentioned that magic doesn't exist in the same way. So if you want to cast a fireball, it's not possible in this world to just say some words and do an incantation or do anything like that to make the fireball appear. The closest way to reproduce these effects is with technology. So as a general rule of thumb, certain classes in this world specialize into learning the technology that produces these effects. So just like in D&D you have material components for fireball, for example, then somebody who wants to replicate the same effect in the Blue Wasteland would have to have, say, a flamethrower and enough gasoline to power it, or would have made a grenade ahead of time and perhaps can use a similar effect. So if it's an effect that can be replicated in an easy way, in a straightforward way with a low level of technology, typically it's possible to exist in this world. Although, of course, it's much less wide used than in a high fantasy setting. How else is this different? Well, there's certain effects in D&D that are not very tech friendly, let's say. Controlling the weather, communication over long distances with many people, especially in a setting where we said technology is, rare and unreliable. These things would be difficult. So some effects can be replicated with psionics. And I know that in Dungeons & Dragons, psionics before have been expanded to cover lots and lots of different effects. Basically, they can do anything magic can do. But in this world, they are much more limited as well. So again, they're limited to specific classes, and those classes, instead of using magic in the traditional sense to do these effects, instead use psionics to achieve this. So one example for illustration purposes here would be the druid in this world. Now, the druid obviously manipulates weather, manipulates nature, and so on. We're not going to get into classes today, but one way the druid could operate in this world is, instead of casting a spell to change the behavior of an animal, the druid would use a combination of body language and psionics to affect if the animal sees somebody as a friend or as an enemy, as a quick example. And any other effect that can be explained or functionally replicated with this type of very, very simple psionics could be replicated in this world as well. Otherwise, science is an option, but unfortunately summoning is not an option in this case. One big difference in this world compared to a typical fantasy setting is that summoning basically doesn't exist. So normally in D&D you would cast a X level spell to summon animals or demons or dragons or whatever. So this type of gate opening and creature appearing effect simply doesn't exist. So any class that would any class or any subclass or any archetype and so on that would particularly rely on this simply doesn't function in this world. But here you may think, well, that takes away from a lot of the D&D setting, and that is correct. This is a very specialized version of all the material available in D&D, and it is purpose-built to express this kind of environment, this kind of world. So just like in a post-apocalyptic movie, you don't have people casting spells and summoning unicorns. Taking away that element that is not native to that setting actually amplifies the setting, and that's why it's cool to see how this works in this fashion. So summoning doesn't work that way, and also healing works quite differently than in D&D. So in D&D typically you have clerics who are very good at casting cure spells, so they can cast them over distance and so on. This works only as far as medicine, modern medicine, for example, allows. Although, again, in a lesser degree, because technology and science overall has regressed in this campaign setting. So that means that, yes, it's possible to have a quick drink to boost your energy and make you maybe block pain or get a quick energy boost or something. But things like resurrection, instantly regrowing limbs, and similar very, very profound effects like that are simply not possible. So this just amplifies the effect of protection in combat in the sense of cover, being more careful, and ultimately life being much more volatile in this world versus a typical D&D setting. So since we talked about resurrection, then the next topic to cover is undead. So in a typical fantasy setting, undead are a staple. of the setting, it's very possible to raise the dead, raise zombies, skeletons, have all these things to fight against or to use in combat. That doesn't exist in this campaign setting. There is no concept of undead, and if somebody is dead, there's no reason, no way to make them alive again. The whole concept and the whole focus of classes that specialize in the use of undead is instead switched to robots. So just like somebody would be able to raise the dead in a fantasy setting, here they instead specialize in the knowledge of robots, machines, robotics, and so on. So if a character would normally be able to raise the dead, in this setting they're able to put a machine together, figure out the circuit boards and electronics and programs and so on, just enough to be able to make a machine walk in a wobbly, unstable, very zombie-like way. And just like in fantasy settings, these characters can also heal the undead and bolster them and so on. This works in a similar way with robots, because if a robot is damaged in combat, then the specialist who created it or who maintains it can of course repair it or even expand its capabilities later on. So that's how undead work in this game. And another big area where sorry, my throat is dying. I don't know why it does that. Anyway, another area where these robots come into play is in the form of ships, and in particular airships. So I mentioned before that a big part of this world is covered in water. Typically you would think, well, if there's so much water, why don't people use sailing ships or naval ships? The problem is that in this world with so much pollution and radiation and so on, there have been quite drastic mutations to animals, to the point where there's huge monsters, I suppose you could call them, that not just inhabit the water, are not just mutated large sea creatures that roam around the water, but some of them in fact have used the Levistone, have consumed it, or are using it in one way or another in their bodies to be able to levitate themselves as well, and basically roam the sky freely. So anyway, because these creatures exist in the water and they're so large and powerful, boats would make a very, very easy target for them. Now, because that's the case, travel by airship is a much more reliable way of travel, although of course it's not completely reliable, since these creatures can jump out of the water to attack an airship, or they can roam the sky as well, and they do roam the sky as well. It's just that it's much more rare for them to be encountered floating around the sky versus living in water. So that's where the airships come in. The airships do come in another way that's a bit special to D&D, and it's particular to this campaign setting. So typically the way the party travels around this world is with this airship, right? Either they build it themselves, they buy it, they take it from someone, and regardless what they do, it's a very integral part of any adventuring party in this world. And so the airship counts as a character, but this character is not controlled by any one human player. Instead, it's available to everyone. So the airship in this world has its own character sheet, it has its own abilities, and this is an option by the players. Of course, the players can use an airship and just go from place A to place B and not have to worry about what the airship does or its abilities and so on. But if it's their own airship that they use for combat and for getting from A to B, and it's essentially their home away from home, it's where they live their day to day when they're traveling this very hostile place, then the players have the option of having this airship as an additional character, and this airship is what they do in the 8 hours of supposed downtime that every adventuring character has in their day. So Typically in D&D, it's said that 8 hours per day the character trains or maintains their equipment and so on, so that's how they pass their downtime. In this campaign setting, if you go with the option of having the ship as a playable character, then the ship has its own character sheet. It has its own abilities such as engine, ship speed, how many cannons it has, also how much armor it has, how many hit points, what abilities, and so on. And here you're wondering, well, this is great and all, but why does a ship need a character sheet? Well, because all this time the players spend maintaining the ship and learning its abilities and basically living in it and with it gives the ship experience points. So every time the party levels up, if you have a mechanic where the party levels up at the same time, the ship levels up with them. If you're using the more free experience kind of model, then the ship is gaining as much experience as any player would from a given encounter. And over time, the ship can both be equipped with better cannons, better armor, better engines, and so on, depending on what the players find in the world. And also the ship gets skills and feats every time it levels up. So again, this is a very deep topic to go into, and the whole point of this world is high customization. So two airships would behave completely differently in terms of capabilities, armaments, and so on. But the general concept here is that every time the airship levels up, it can gain a feat, or it can gain a major upgrade. If it's a major upgrade, it's in the form of material or equipment around the ship. So of course it's possible to just take a single item and put it on the ship and say, now this is part of the ship. But if you want to do large upgrades, such as improve the armor of the entire ship, or improve all of the cannons of the ship, or do a major engine overhaul, and so on, these are level up abilities or level up resources that the players get to spend. If they don't want to do that, if the players don't want to do a machine type of upgrade of this sort, then instead the ship gains a feat. And the feat the ship can gain is taken from the same list as the feats that the players have available to them. And of course here you might be thinking, well, some of the feats don't even make sense for the ship to take, and you're 100% correct. So if it's a feat about, for example, the player becoming better with diplomacy or persuasion and so on, of course this doesn't make any sense. But if it's a feat like performing a charge attack, or doing ranged attacks better, or being faster, more maneuverable, more energy efficient, any sort of combat related ability that can be applied to ranged attacks or ramming attacks and so on, all these things are very much possible. And one of the ways players use these feats in an interesting way in my campaign was they took the lucky feat, I think, where it allows them 3 rerolls per session, essentially. So whenever they were doing an action that had the ship as the main component, so evading action or an attack or something like that, then they could use a lucky feat to reroll one of these rolls. So again, the whole point of this is to make it very customizable, and of course lead all these decisions in the direction of fun. So if something makes sense in the game, and it would make it fun for the players to use the ship in this way, then it's something that perhaps could be allowed by the dungeon master. So we talked a little bit about the ship, and the last part is the classes. So unfortunately the classes themselves have way too many details to just cover them all in one video. So what I think would be a good approach for this is to do one little spotlight for each class. What I can tell you about the classes in general is that the same classes that are available in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons are available in the Blue Wasteland as well. However, all of them have pretty significant modifications in the way they work. So they're all available, but they are all very heavily modified to suit this world. So if you're looking forward to that, if you would like to know more about any particular class and how it works, then let me know down below, and I'll do my best to prioritize that class. Anyway, that's it for today. I know we covered a lot of material. I know you have a lot of questions, and there's only so much I can cover in a single video. But if you have questions about how effects work in any of these categories, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for your time, and as always, have fun.